So we have a new addition to the fleet. Awesome new beastie here. This is a 1972 Jeep Wagoneer. It is in somewhat rough shape, but I mean, really, it's impressive how complete it is. You can see all the metal trim accents are still on there. The interior is particularly rough, but this will make a great restoration project. It is particularly, it caught my eye for a number of reasons. It is just classic. I love these old Wagoneers. I've always wanted one. I mean, they have a reputation of excellence, and there's not that many of them on the road. They're really, really awesome, just in general to find, much less one in, good running order. And this was the selling point that I just couldn't resist, is it's a manual transmission, which is just awesome. And you can see, I mean, it's real rough around the edges. I think at one point it definitely has spent time on military base. It's got a sticker on the bumper, but it might have started life as a military vehicle. You see this signal flare here. It's definitely, it reminds me of, I was very briefly in the Army Reserves, and we drove the deuce and a half ton trucks, and they had this kind of a turn signal, and you don't, because it's so loud, you don't think about it, it doesn't turn off, so you have to reposition it. It doesn't just automatically turn off like you expect when you turn the steering wheel back. But and the driver's seat is all messed up, which I'm gonna reclaim all this and probably tear a lot of the trim out. The door panels aren't in terrible shape. I think they can all be recovered. The back seat is in really not bad shape. It's got a split over here, but the back part is actually in remarkably good shape. You can see the truck bed area back there. And this is a 72, and so this officially for me makes it my earliest vehicle I've ever owned. Up until this, the winner was our, Sean's now, the 928. But one of the first projects I'm going to need to do on this is figure out the back here, because obviously this is not, obviously this is not stock. It's got plywood here, and the paint itself, while not an unattractive color, the paint is literally somebody brushed it on. It's not sprayed on. You can see there's a lot of, I mean, it might be actual automotive paint. It seems, when we first saw that it was rolled on, Lauren's like, that's somebody's, painted this with our house paint, because it's very, very similar. You can see the color on our house is, that I painted the house, is pretty much identical to this. So we really like the color, but it's not a permanent paint job. It's somebody just rolled this on, probably with, just paint rollers. And so it's really crusty. I mean, they've barely even tried to not get it on the trim and everything, but luckily it's not very good paint, so it's gonna come off real easily. You can see that's coming off no problem. And it looks like, from the areas where the paint is already peeled off, that this was originally like a metallic gold green. It's really hard to tell, but I mean, it's it's in rough shape. It's I can't afford cars that aren't in rough shape in some form or another. We actually put $0 into this, insofar as I traded the young gentleman that I bought it from. I traded him a pair of our firearms, which, we live in Georgia, so as long as he is a Georgia resident and doesn't have felonies, which I confirmed with him, then you can trade guns freely. Obviously all legal. above board. And so he was happy with his guns. He said he's had this about 2 years. He told me about how he got a hold of it and so forth. And real nice young man. He said he's just been using it as a woods Jeep. He showed me his family's land. They've got a really awesome, all his family lives on this big, I think he said like 450 acres farm that's been basically divided over the generations into various subfamilies. But yeah, there's the Fort Gordon sticker. So this has definitely spent time on a base, whether it was actually a base vehicle or, you know, just owned by somebody on base is unsure. But really in pretty solid shape. It drives, you know, like you expect a 45-year-old vehicle to drive, but it seems really sturdy and reliable. Drove it home absolutely no problem. The you know, I'm gonna put some serious effort into restoring it, because this is a rare classic vehicle. These Jeeps are just awesome. And it's got the straight 6 in it, which I was also happy, even though it's not as powerful as the V8. I think it was a 360, the V8. This is like a 258 AMC straight 6 or 4-liter. Those engines are legendary for their longevity. It's again impossible to know exactly how many miles are on here because, well, you can't quite see it. It's 70, almost 5, but it doesn't have a 100,000 mark, so it doesn't, you know, we don't know what the hundreds are. It could be 175, 200, 400, who knows. Still runs fine, and the 4x4 works. I'm going to have to check out the settings of the 4x4, because this being an older one, you could actually put it in 2-wheel drive, high, or 4 high or 4 low. It's one of those style. Whereas like our Land Rover is all-wheel in regard that it's always 4x4, and you just either choose high or low. This actually, you can disengage the front and have it go 2-wheel drive. It has these massive mud grabber tires, or Mud Brute, Remington Mud Brute. Still really good. I mean, those are some serious tires on there, and you know, not great for high speed. You start humming pretty quickly going down the road with these. This one's a little bit low on air. The parking brake does not work, so that's going to be something for me to look into, but I'm just, you know, chalking it in the meantime. This is pretty cool. This has locking hubs. So this is the old school way of locking, is you actually mechanically lock there. So like the Land Rover, it locks automatically, the differential. But these you lock, and so it has a lock and a free, and it's almost a full rotation. So you need to lock it. You only lock it pretty much when you're in 4x4 low, trying to, you know, crawl up a hill, that sort of thing. But really a cool vehicle. I am going to enjoy working on it, and, you know, we're not going to have to depend on it in any way, so it's just going to be a nice, easy vehicle to keep around, just, you know, tinker on and have fun with. You know, not sure what our long-term goals with it will be, whether we're going to want to sell it or keep it as an heirloom or what. I saw this thing, it was local. The guy ended up only living like 5 miles away from us, which was just, you know, really cool. And I just, you know, it was one of those, like, too good to pass up. Just a classic vehicle in rough, you know, needs TLC, but otherwise really solid. I'm going to start, the very first thing I did when I got it home was started spraying every bit of rust I could find with WD-40. That's always just a first step to arresting rust, is oil it so it doesn't continue. Once you've oiled it, then you can start hitting it with wire brushes and so forth to actually remove the rust, and then, you know, paint over it. So it does have a good bit of rust. It's the undercarriage is not bad. The undercarriage is surprisingly good for a vehicle of this age. You can see the I-beams are still solid. They've got some surface rust, but nothing that I can't pretty easily take care of in a rest. And you know, this has aftermarket Dana locking differentials, which is really cool. And it has the quad leaf springs. So you see the suspension here. The suspension, these are called leaf springs. So rather than a coil, like you have in most vehicles, this is, usually you only see leaf springs on the back of pickup trucks. So like the, you know, both of our Ford pickup trucks, which are down in the hill in the doghouse, both of them have the leaf springs in the rear. That's pretty standard for trucks. This is interesting because it's got them in the front too. So like those old Ford trucks had the I-beams in front, but I guess with the 4x4 and so forth, it's got the, so it, you know, the good thing about leaf springs is that they have a lot of attention. I mean, you can, you know, they're really tough. There's a reason they put them in the back of pickup trucks, but they don't ride worth a darn because they're going to bounce you all over the place. So you can see the shocks in here. I'll probably replace pretty soon. They're, you know, pretty old, but this is a just really cool vehicle that I am really feel blessed that we were able to get it. Lauren loves it too. So, you know, I'm gonna put some work into it, and I think it should be a good vehicle. It was super cheap to insure because I dropped the insurance on the 150 since we've been I've just been fighting with it. You know, it feels like every time I take one step forward it's two steps backwards on that thing, and so I just parked it down the hill, and I'm not going to mess with it again until Al can come. I'm just sick of it. We don't need it in the meantime, so we've got the Land Rover, which is working awesome, and this thing too, which will supplement our truck abilities. One thing to note about a vehicle this old, now they made the Wagoners, Wagoneers up until the early 90s, I believe. And this one being as old as it is, 72, it's actually, as far as I understand, it's legal to drive without a seatbelt in these because they weren't required yet. And this has the center seatbelt, so the, you know, the kind that buckles in the center, and then you pull it tight rather than where you're buckling down there. And you know, generally speaking, just lap belts, it's actually in certain regards worse, depending on how you get hit. If you get hit with lap belts, because it can whiplash you. So I'm probably going to retrofit into this some column, you know, some shoulder belts. I haven't decided entirely on how I want to go forward with that, but definitely want to try to improve the safety standards of this. You know, we don't want to ride with the kids in it until we get better harnessing to put their kid seats in. But overall, very cool vehicle. You know, don't have much money these days, but it was a very low investment in terms of we just, you know, liquidated a couple of our guns. But overall, very cool, and I think it'll be a fun project to restore. These things are just so rare. I've only seen a couple of them in all the years that I've been watching the Facebook boards. I've only seen a couple of them ever go up on sale. The last one I saw was an 80s one, and it was in nice condition, but it still went for something like $10,000. And, you know, a lot of that's just to do with the fact that Jeeps are legendary, long-lived vehicles, and you know, so the brand has really good longevity, and this particular model tends to be rather rare. You see a lot of Cherokees, you see a lot of Wranglers, CJs, that sort of thing, but it is hard to come across one of these, especially the fact that it is a manual transmission with the straight six. Just, you know, we found ourselves another unicorn. So, awesome new acquisition. So here's the engine bay on this grand old Wagoneer. You know, it's literally cavernous, as in as I'm talking I can hear my echo. And there's so few things in here. I can pretty quickly isolate most of what's going on here. So, you know, this is the smaller straight six, the 4-liter straight six, which again is just a classic, I mean, awesome engine. And of course there's our distributor right there. All your plugs in the row. There's your oil filter right there in the back. Very easy to get to. Everything on this is easy to get to. I mean, you can see straight through down to the differential. I can practically crawl up in here. There's just so much room. It'll be very easy to grab everything. There's your steering column coming down there. You only have 2 peripherals on the front of the engine. There's the alternator, which looks not terribly old. And there's the power steering pump, which actually works quite well. This is a huge vehicle, and I am surprised. I was surprised when I was driving it how easily it drove, you know, turning and so forth, because you kind of expect this thing to turn like a tractor. It looks like a tractor. There's the master cylinder for the brakes, which looks pretty ancient, so might be a good idea to replace that. The brakes are, they work fine, but you really got to put your foot into them. And these are, you know, pre-anti-lock, pre-ABS, so you do want to pump your brakes to make sure they don't break, they don't seize. You know, they say don't do that. Well, you don't do that if you have anti-lock brakes, because then pumping them just confuses your computer. But in the older regular brakes, you do need to pump them. There's your fuel filter right there, which is still pretty new. It's fun that it's just right there. Very easy to get to, not even up under the engine. Of course, the fan actually turns the alternator over there. These are J-belts, which were very typical back then. Here's your water pump, or there's your water pump right on the front of the engine. That's your return, right? You got these extra thick hoses there. I do notice that the cowl here is just held on by zip ties, and I have better zip ties than that. I'm going to get some metal zip ties in there. There's a couple more points that I can reinforce that, maybe even put some bolts in. But there's a horn. There's of course the air box up on top, which I assume there's supposed to be some sort of a intake arm tube here that has since come off, but it is this is similar to the 300E that we have in terms of, it's actually a very similar configuration, being a straight 6 with the round intake on top. And so there's your intake and throttle assembly. Super easy to get at everything. I mean, this thing will be just, you know, really easy to work on, generally speaking, because it's so low tech compared to, I mean, I work on old cars, but even compared to what I usually do, this is pretty ancient. Now, one thing I am going to need to do at some point is replace the motor mounts, which are still in there, but you can see they've got a piece of chain on there as an additional, it's so dark, there we go, come on, lighten up. It's not really focusing in right, but there's a piece of chain, just I assume added protection there, because it has slid a little bit off the motor mount, although it's still there and the motor mount's not broken, it is all bolted in still. But I will get the opportunity to use I recently got an engine hoist. You can see this one is much better, that it, you know, hasn't slipped like it has on the other side. So but overall, very cool vehicle. Of course, I'm hitting everything with WD-40, especially any bits of rust, but WD-40 is your friend. And you know, just trying to lubricate everything down. Okay, well, let's hear it fire up. Now the key in this is funny because, I mean, again, it's so ancient. It's this tiny little thing. Looks like it ought to be in a lock box or something. And they have, so I'm using the clutch as the parking brake. Since the parking brake's out, it also, of course, has the blocks there chocking us to help us. And so it is in gear now. Of course, I'm putting the clutch in. Let's see if okay, the chocks are working there. Well, that's not encouraging. Alright, so I was just being cranky. It is a 45-year-old vehicle that has not been tuned up yet. But I didn't have to do anything to it. I just, you know, let it sit for a second. I might have flooded the engine when I first got in. And it's squeaking because everything's been WD-40'd. But chocks are working just fine. It is an ancient beast, but it lives on, and I'm really, you know, happy to have it. I think it's going to be a great project, great restoration, a rare and classic vehicle worthy of some work.
Oil.
It's oil?
Yeah.
It's really dark oil, isn't it? Yeah, I gotta wash it off, and I need to change that oil, don't I?
Yeah.
Yep, it's dirty. That's dirty oil. I just checked I've got our Wagoneer here running. About to do an oil change on it. Super impressed with this old beast. It is ancient, and it is just as crusty as can be, but seems like a very reliable vehicle that'll go till doomsday, as long as we treat it right. And this is really black. The oil, I just checked the dipstick, which the dipstick is way in the back, way back there. This is a 258 or 4.2 liter. It's a little bit bigger. It's the same basic engine as the 4 liter, it's just slightly larger displacement. Straight 6, inline 6. You see it abbreviated L6. You know, cool stuff like you have a mechanically driven fuel pump because this is carbureted, so there's your fuel, goes up down the line, there's your filter, there's your carburetor. But I'm going to let the engine warm up for a little while, and once the engine oil gets good and warm, we'll be draining it. I've been reading in forums. I'm going to put 10W40 in this. There's some discussion you want a little bit heavier weight oil in these older engines, and you know, and we're not in real cold climate here. And the filter is easy to get to. It's right there on the side of the engine in the back. I'll be crawling up under it in just a moment to, once it gets good and warmed up, to drain it. But it should be a pretty straightforward operation. See, there's a fuel filter. You can see the fuel passing through there. Fuel filter still looks real good. So, super impressed with this 45-year-old monster. Oh yeah, and check this out too. Something I noticed as I've been cleaning it up is it has stenciled military numbers right there. So pretty sure this was probably a fleet vehicle, probably for Army base in its first life. I'm sure it's been through many things since, but really cool old truck.